Look at the posture of the man who is behind on his rent. Look at the angle of his shoulders, the set of his jaw, the direction of his eyes when a stranger asks him about his plans. Now look at the man who is quietly building a fortune, who rises each morning with a demand already formed in his mind, a plan already written on paper, and a decision already made that defeat is not among his available options. These two men were not separated by inheritance. They were not separated by opportunity, nor by intelligence, nor by the generosity of providence. They were separated by the direction of their dominant thought, and by nothing else on the face of this earth. There is a stream of power running through every human life. One side of that stream carries men forward and upward toward wealth. The other side carries men downward toward poverty. And the law which governs which side a man finds himself upon is not fate. It is not luck. It is not the economy or the employer or the circumstance of. It is the nature of his habitual thought. In this address, I will lay before you 5 laws drawn from more than 20 of study of the men who built the great fortunes of this age and the far greater number of men who never escaped poverty into which they were born. I will name the enemy that is holding you in survival mode. And I will give you law by law and step by step the philosophy by which any man of sound mind and willing purpose may cross from the poverty side of that stream to the side where wealth waits not for the lucky but for the definite. Part 1. The enemy has no face, understanding the fear of poverty. I want to tell you about a young man. He was not a failure by the world's early reckoning. He held a post at a respected financial institution in one of the great cities of this nation. He wore clean clothes. He spoke with intelligence. He had the appearance of a man who was going somewhere. But underneath that appearance, something was working against him silently, persistently, with terrible efficiency. He had fallen into the habit of living a little beyond his income, not lavishly, not recklessly, simply a little beyond. A small debt here, a modest expenditure there that could not quite be covered. The debts accumulated the way weeds accumulate in an untended garden, quietly without announcement, until the morning arrives when a man looks out and can no longer see the flowers. The worry came first. Worry always comes first. It entered his mind like a slow poison, and began to show itself in his work, in the hesitation of his decisions, in the distraction of his attention, in the slight deterioration of everything he rendered. His employer noticed, he was dismissed. He found another position at lesser pay. His creditors were not so easily left behind. They followed him. The new employer learned of the debts and dismissed him well. For 2 months he searched for work and found nothing. One cold night he climbed the roof of a tall building on Broadway, and debt had claimed another victim. Not the debt of dollars, for the sum was not enormous. The debt of thought, the debt of fear, the debt that is always collected sooner or later from the man who permits his mind to be occupied by the fear of poverty. I have studied this enemy for the whole of my adult life. I have watched it destroy men of genuine ability. I have watched it paralyze men who possessed every outward advantage. And I have concluded without the slightest reservation that the fear of poverty is the most destructive of all the fears that afflict the human race. It requires a degree of courage to state this plainly, and perhaps even greater courage to accept it. This fear is not a circumstance. It is not the economy. It is not your employer. It is not the family into which you were born. The fear of poverty is a state of mind. And like all states of mind, it is something that a man has in some measure chosen, and what has been chosen can be unchosen. But first the man must recognize the enemy. Most men, if you were to ask them point blank whether they feared poverty, would answer without hesitation, "I fear nothing." This is the most dangerous lie a man can speak, not because it is dishonest, but because he has spoken it so long and so often that he has convinced himself it is true. The fear of poverty is the subtlest of the 6 great fears, because it does not announce itself as fear. It announces itself as reason, as caution, as practical thinking. Let me give you its symptoms that you may diagnose yourself with the same honesty that a physician diagnoses a patient. The first symptom is indifference, the willingness to accept whatever wages and conditions life sees fit to offer. without protest and without the effort of demanding more. The man in the grip of this symptom does not rage at his circumstances. He has simply ceased to believe that his circumstances can be changed. He has ceased to believe that his circumstances can be changed. He has made his peace with smallness. The second symptom is indecision. The habit of sitting on the fence in every matter of importance, permitting other men to do his thing, never committing to a course of action long enough for that action to bear fruit. The indecisive man always has a reason why now is not quite the right time. The third symptom is doubt, expressed not always as doubt of oneself, but frequently as cynicism about those who have succeeded. The man ruled by doubt studies the failures of others with great enthusiasm. He collects evidence that the game is rigged, that success belongs to the fortunate few, that effort is futile. Every successful man he sees is explained away by luck or deception. This doubt is the alibi factory of the defeated mind. The fourth symptom is worry. The habit of finding fault with everything, of spending beyond the income while complaining about the income, in a perpetual state of low-grade emergency that never becomes a crisis and therefore never quite demands resolution. The fifth symptom is overcaution. The habit of looking for every reason not to act, of remembering every man who has ever failed while conveniently forgetting every man who has ever succeeded, of waiting for the perfect moment that never arrives until the waiting itself has become the habit of a lifetime. And the sixth symptom, the one that is perhaps most familiar to those who watch this address, is procrastination. The habit of putting off until tomorrow what should have been done last year. Spending more time building alibis for inaction than the action itself would have required. Bargaining with life for a penny when prosperity, opulence, and freedom are available to any man who will demand them. Now here is the law I wish you to carry forward from this first part of our discussion, for it governs everything that follows. Thought impulses of fear and poverty cannot be translated into terms of courage and financial gain. The two states of mind are as incompatible as fire and water. You cannot hold in your mind a dominating fear of poverty and at the same tract the conditions of wealth. The mind does not work in that fashion. Nature does not work in that fashion. What a man most persistently thinks is what he most reliably becomes and what he most really attracts. The stream is always running. The question is only which side of it you are on. The current that carries men to ruin. The law of hypnotic rhythm and the drifter. I want you to picture a particular kind of man. You may know him. You may, if you will search your own history with sufficient honesty, recognize something of yourself in him. He is not idle. I wish to say that plainly at the outset, because the man I am describing is very often mistaken for a lazy man, and he is not lazy. He works. He expends considerable energy. He begins things. He has plans. He has, in fact, a great many plans, which is precisely the problem. He takes a position and discovers after a few weeks that it is not quite the right position. He does not resign. He simply diminishes his effort until the position becomes what his diminished effort deserves. He hears of an opportunity and pursues it for a time. He saves a few dollars and then spends them, telling himself he will begin saving again, next month. He intends to make a definite plan for his future, and this intention remains an intention suspended perpetually in the region between thought and action year after year, gathering neither dust nor momentum. He is not a bad man. He is not even by ordinary measures an unsuccessful man yet, but something invisible has taken possession of the steering mechanism of his life. He does not know it is there. He could not name it if you asked him, and this invisibility is the very source of its power. I call it the law of hypnotic rhythm. And the name is not poetic license. It is the most literal description I can offer of what nature does to the mind that is left without a definite ruling purpose. Here is the law plainly stated. Any thought or physical movement which is repeated over and over through the principle of habit finally reaches the proportion of rhythm, and then the habit cannot be broken, because nature takes it over and makes it permanent. Think of a whirlpool in a river. An object floating in open water moves freely. It can be redirected with the slightest effort. But let it be caught in a whirlpool, and it will go round and round, carried not by its own direction, but by the force of the current, unable to escape, no matter how it strains against the pull. This is what happens to the man who drifts. Every day that he lives without a definite aim is a day in which the whirlpool tightens. Every week that he postpones the decision to demand something specific of life is a week in which the rhythm of poverty deepens its groove in his mind. And after a sufficient number of weeks, after a sufficient number of years, the rhythm becomes so deeply established that the man can no longer escape it by ordinary means. Nature has made it permanent. I have, in the whole course of my research, analyzed the habits and histories of more than 25,000 men and women. I discovered in that analysis a fact so sobering that I have never ceased to be moved by it. Only 2 men out of every 100 had a definite major purpose in life. The remaining 98 drifting. 98 out of every 100. Not drifting because they were evil. Not drifting because they were foolish. Drifting because no one had ever told them the cost of purposelessness. No one had ever explained that nature does not simply permit a man to drift. She uses his drifting. She takes the aimless thought and hardens it. She takes the repeated hesitation and converts it into a permanent posture. She takes the habit of going wherever the current carries and makes it the law of that man's life. After the Wall Street collapse of 1929, millions of men in this nation chose, and I use that word deliberately, chose to think of poverty. They spoke of it, wrote of it, organized their conversations around it, made it the dominant occupation of their minds. Slowly, but with terrible certainty, that mass thought crystallized into its physical equivalent. The depression did not happen to those men from outside. It rose up from within them, clothed in the material of their own prevailing thought. This is not a comfortable truth. I offer it to you not for comfort, but for use. Now, I will give you the other side of this law, because the same law that imprisons the drifter is available to liberate him. If hypnotic rhythm can make poverty permanent, it can equally make the habit of prosperity permanent. If nature takes hold of a man's negative thought habits and hardens them into a life sentence of want, she will, with equal faithfulness, take hold of a man's positive thought habits and harden them into the conditions of wealth. The law operates without preference. It serves whichever master it is given. The question is not whether the law operates. The question is only this: what thought will you choose to give it? And that question brings us to the third part of this address, and to the one decision that changes everything. Part 3. The one decision that changes everything. Definiteness of purpose as the escape. Some years ago, before any man alive could have predicted what would come of him, a young man arrived in the state of New Jersey, looking considerably worse than he felt. He had traveled a great distance. He had no money of consequence. He had no formal education that would impress any employer. He knew no one in the city to which he had come. And the man he intended to see was the most famous inventor in the world, besieged daily by letters and callers and admirers, a man whose time was worth more per hour than earned in a month. The young man had not been invited. He cleaned himself as well as his circumstances permitted and walked to the offices of this great inventor. When he arrived, he did not ask for a job. He did not petition for an opportunity. He stated clearly, with the full conviction of a man who had settled the matter in his own mind long before he ever arrived at that door, that he had come to go into business with this man. He was given a menial position. He took it without complaint, for it placed him inside the door he had chosen to enter. 5 years passed. Not a single ray of encouragement was offered. Not one word of special recognition. To every man in that organization, he was simply another worker among workers, a small figure in a large enterprise, notable for nothing in particular. But here is what no one around him could see. In his own mind, he was already that great inventor. He had decided it. He had written it. He repeated it to himself with the regularity and conviction of a man who holds a deed to a property that has not yet been built. And the decision had been made permanent by one additional act. The act that distinguishes the man who eventually wins from every man who nearly wins. He had burned all bridges behind him. There was no fallback position. No alternative employment kept warm against the possibility of failure. No secret plan to try something else if this did not work out. He had said in the privacy of his own mind, "There is but one thing in this world that I intend to have, and before I am through, I will have it." He had made retreat not merely unattractive, but structurally impossible. One day, the inventor introduced a new device to his sales force. They could not move it. They declared it unsellable. The young man stepped forward and said, "Give it to me." He sold it. The contract he requested was drawn. The partnership was formed. His name was Edwin C. Barnes, and he became the business associate of Thomas Edison through no force other than the absolute, unconditional, burning demand he had placed upon his own mind and upon life itself. Now, I do not tell you this story so that you may admire Edwin Barnes. I tell it so that you may understand the mechanism by which he won, because that mechanism is available to any man who is willing to employ it. There is a truth I have observed in the histories of every man who has crossed from the poverty side of life's stream to the side that carries men toward wealth, and it is this. The crossing begins not with money, not with education, not with favorable circumstance, but with a decision so definite and so final that the subconscious mind has no alternative but to accept it as a standing order. The drifter keeps every door open. He tells himself, this is wisdom, that a man ought to preserve his options, that flexibility is the mark of intelligence. But what he has actually done is instruct his subconscious mind that he is not entirely serious. He has told nature that he might go this direction, or he might go that one, or he see what develops. And nature, being indifferent to wishes, gives him precisely what his posture asks for, which is nothing in particular. The non-drifter does something categorically different. He chooses. He chooses one thing, not many things, not a comfortable range of possibilities, but one definite aim. And he commits to it with the finality of a man who has burned the boats. And from the moment of that commitment, the subconscious mind, which is the great connecting link between the finite mind of man and the infinite intelligence that underlies all creation, begins to work night and day toward the fulfillment of what it has been given as its standing order. Now, let me tell you precisely what definiteness of purpose looks like when it is applied to the matter of escaping financial poverty, because it is not sufficient to say, I intend to be wealthy, and let the matter rest there. The first step is to fix in your mind the exact amount of money you intend to possess, not more money, not enough to be comfortable, a number, a specific figure, a definite sum. The subconscious mind does not respond to vague wishes. It responds to clear, definite, emotionally charged instructions. The second step is to determine precisely what you intend to give in exchange for this money. There is no such reality in this universe as something for nothing. Every fortune that was ever honestly built was built upon a foundation of genuine service rendered. The man who expects wealth without determining what value he will produce in exchange for it has not yet formed a definite purpose. He has formed a wish, which is an entirely different and far less powerful thing. The third step is to set a specific date, not someday, not in a few years. A date. The definiteness of the date forces the definiteness of the plan. The fourth step is to create a written plan and to begin carrying it out at once, whether you believe yourself fully ready or not. Most men never begin because they are waiting to feel ready. The feeling of readiness is itself a product of motion, not a prerequisite for it. Begin and readiness will follow. The fifth step, and this is the step that governs the speed of the entire enterprise, is to write out a clear statement of your purpose and your plan, and to read it aloud twice each day, morning and night, with full emotional conviction, as though the object of your desire is already in your possession. This is not mere ceremony. This is the precise mechanism by which a thought impulse is driven past the conscious mind and lodged in the subconscious, where it takes on the force of a standing order. Every impulse of thought that is repeated with sufficient feeling and frequency will eventually clothe itself in its physical equivalent. This is as much a law of nature as the law of gravitation. It operates whether a man believes in it or not, whether he understands it or not, whether he intended to set it in motion or not. The man in survival mode has a wish for more money. The man who escaped survival mode has a demand, and he has addressed that demand not to his employer, not to the government, not to the economy, but to the only power that can actually deliver it, sovereign authority of his own trained and directed mind. Make the decision. Make it today. Make it final. And then, as Barnes did, as every man who has ever crossed that stream has done, burn the ships. Part 4. The habit that builds fortunes from pennies, the law of thrift and the savings habit. There was once a young man who worked with his hands for a modest wage. He had no remarkable talent, no unusual education, no powerful connections. He lived within his income, not extravagantly, not with any great self-congratulation, but simply and consistently. And he saved each week faithfully. He set aside a portion of what he earned. By the time he had been at this practice for a number of years, he had accumulated the sum of $200. His roommate was a man of genuine inventive talent who had created a practical household article, well-designed, of real use to families, and had been unable to bring it to market for one reason alone. He had never developed the habit of saving a single dollar. He had no capital. His talent might as well have been buried in the ground. The young machinist came forward with his $200. The two men manufactured a small supply of the invention, sold it house to house, reinvested every cent they received, manufactured more, sold more, and continued in this fashion until they had accumulated reinvested every cent they received, manufactured more, sold more, and continued in this fashion until they had accumulated $1,000 of working capital. With that, plus credit they were now able to secure, they purchased the tools for manufacturing their own product. 6 years later, the machinist sold his half-interest in the enterprise for $250,000. Here's the gap between the people who manifest wealth and the people who only watch videos about it. The wealthy install the idea daily until the mind accepts it as already done. You can't do that from memory. You need it in front of you. That's why I made the free auto-suggestion sheet. 1 page. Read it morning and night, and you start reprogramming your self-image around money. It's free at the first link in the description. He never possessed a fraction of that sum at any point in his life before the day he began saving. He never would have seen it at any point after had he never possessed a fraction of that sum at any point in his life before the day he began saving. He never would have seen it at any point after had he not formed the habit which allowed him to bring it into existence. $200 saved faithfully, planted in a soil of opportunity, and returned $250,000. This is not an exceptional story. I could multiply it 1,000 times with only slight variation as to details, because it is the story of the beginning of most of the great fortunes that have been built in this nation. The habit of saving is not merely one good practice among many. It is, as I have concluded, after a lifetime of studying the men who built wealth from nothing, the true starting point of financial independence. And yet, I have watched men and women resist this truth with a stubbornness that would be admirable if it were directed towards something useful. They will tell me that one cannot become wealthy mere truth, with a stubbornness that would be admirable if it were directed towards something useful. They will tell me that one cannot become wealthy merely by saving a few dollars a week, and this is technically accurate as far as it goes, which is not very far at all. What they miss entirely is what the savings habit does to the man, in addition to what it does to his bank balance. I once knew a young man who earned $20 a week as a driver for a banker of some prominence in New York City. His employer, curious about the young man's financial habits, induced him to keep an exact account of every cent he spent for 1 week. The result was instructive. He had spent $75 on tobacco, $1.80 at the soda fountain, $1.50 buying cigarettes and cigars for associates, those pleasant little generosities that feel like friendship and cost a man his future. $1 at the picture show, $160 on shaves and the attendant gratuities, pleasant little generosities that feel like friendship and cost a man his future. $1 at the picture show, $160 on shaves and the attendant gratuities, 22 cents on newspapers, 30 cents on shoe shines. Of $20 earned, he had saved 53 cents. Every item on that list could have been reduced. Most of them could have been eliminated entirely by shaving himself and shining his own shoes. He could have recovered the full $747 he had dissipated in a single week. And $747 saved faithfully each week over 10 years would have amounted to a sum sufficient to change the entire direction of his life. But here's what I wish you to understand about that young man, and about every man who spends in this fashion. He was not spending money. He was spending freedom. Every dollar that passed through his hands on unnecessary things was a dollar vote cast in favor of permanent servitude, in favor of having to be at a certain place, performing a certain task for a certain number of hours for the whole permanent servitude, in favor of having to be at a certain place, performing a certain task for a certain number of hours for the whole of his working life. The greatest thing in life is freedom, and there is no real freedom without a reasonable degree of financial independence. The man who cannot say no to an employer, not because he loves the work, but because the rent is due on Friday, is not a free man. He is a man in chains, and the chains are made of his own spending habits. Now hear me plainly on what the savings habit actually produces, because it produces more than money. The man who forms the habit of saving money is at the same time forming the habits of self-control. For saving requires the daily exercise of will against the constant pull of appetite. He is forming the habit of self-confidence, for the man with money in reserve approaches every negotiation, every opportunity, every difficulty from a position of strength rather than desperation. He is forming the habit of courage, for the man who owes nothing to no one fears nothing from no one, and he is forming, most importantly, the habit of decision, the habit of choosing the future over the present moment, the permanent over the temporary, the freedom that takes years to build over the pleasure that lasts an hour. These things cannot be separated. The man who tells me he wants to build wealth but cannot develop the discipline to save a portion of what he earns has told me in the clearest possible language that he is not yet ready to build wealth. For the character required to accumulate wealth and the character required to save money are not two different characters. They are the same character exercised to build wealth. For the character required to accumulate wealth and the character required to save money are not two different characters. They are the same character exercised at different scales, a rule of proportion that I have found sound for the man who works for wages. 20 cents of every dollar to savings set aside before any other consideration. 50 cents to the necessities of living, 10 cents to the education of the mind, 10 cents to wholesome recreation, 10 cents to the provision for the future. This formula is not magic. It is simply the organized application of the principle that a man who lives on less than he earns will in time find himself with more than he needs. And a man who spends all he earns or more will find himself, like year after year, precisely where he stands today. The saving of money is not a financial matter alone. It is a declaration made daily in the language of action that the man intends to command his future rather than be commanded by, precisely where he stands today. The saving of money is not a financial matter alone. It is a declaration made daily in the language of action that the man intends to command his future rather than be commanded by it. Begin today. Begin with whatever amount honesty compels you to name. Begin and do not stop. Part 5. The current that carries men to wealth going the extra mile, the QQS formula, and the final demand. There is one more law I intend to lay before you before I close this address, and it is perhaps the most practically powerful of everything I have yet spoken. It is the law by which a man does not merely preserve what he has, but multiplies it. The law by which a man moves from survival to surplus. The law by which a man moves from survival to surplus. The law that Andrew Carnegie told me in the most direct terms he could command was the single most important discipline in the building of his vast organization. Carnegie did not call it by any technical name. He simply insisted upon it without exception as the price of participation in everything he built. He stated it this way: no man remained in his organization, regardless of the quality of his work, regardless of the quantity of his output, unless he worked in a spirit of genuine harmony, not mere civility, not mere competence. Harmony, the spirit of willing, enthusiastic, cheerful cooperation. Harmony, the spirit of willing, enthusiastic, cheerful cooperation that makes a man a pleasure to work alongside and an asset to every enterprise he touches. Carnegie permitted many men who mastered this quality to become wealthy, those who did not make room for others. Now, this is the principle I call the QQS formula, and it governs the financial value of every service that every man and woman renders in exchange for money. The quality of service is the performance of every detail of your work to the highest standard of efficiency you are capable of delivering, with your eye always on greater efficiency tomorrow than today. The quantity of service is the habit of rendering all the service you are capable of, not merely what is required, not what you have technically agreed to provide, but the full measure of what you could do if you treated your work as though the future of your reputation depended on it. Because it does. And the spirit in which the service is rendered is the habit of agreeable, cooperative conduct, the kind that induces others to help you, speak well of you, seek your company, and trust your judgment. It is in cooperative conduct, the kind that induces others to help you, speak well of you, seek your company, and trust your judgment. It is in practical terms the habit of being the kind of man that other men want to succeed. These three taken together, quality, quantity, spirit, constitute the true measure of a man's worth in the marketplace of service. And the man who masters all three will find that the marketplace comes to him rather than waiting for him to go to it. I have observed in more cases than I can number that the man who waits to go the extra mile until he is paid for it never goes the extra mile at all. He is waiting for a reward that only comes to the man who has already established by consistent and generous habit that he is the kind of man who delivers more than he has been asked to deliver. The day of the man whose only concern is to get as much as possible for as little as possible is past. The man who succeeds in the enduring sense is the man whose only concern is to be so genuinely useful to his employer, to his customers, to his community, to the people his work touches, that the enduring sense is the man whose only concern is to be so genuinely useful to his employer, to his customers, to his community, to the people his work touches, that compensation becomes a matter of simple justice rather than hard bargaining. This is not sentiment. It is the most practical observation I've made in the whole of my research. The man who serves abundantly is always in demand. The man who serves grudgingly is always at the mercy of whoever will tolerate him. Now let me close this address with the full weight of everything that has been said, drawn together into the demand that I wish to make upon you directly. You came to this address in survival mode or near it. You came with the weight of unpaid obligations, or the anxiety of an income that never quite reaches the end of the month. You came with the weight of unpaid obligations, or the anxiety of an income that never quite reaches the end of the month, or the quiet despair of a man who has begun to wonder whether the circumstances of his present life have become the permanent conditions of his future. I have told you the name of the enemy, the fear of poverty, a state of mind, not a circumstance. I have shown you its 6 symptoms that you may identify the specific form in which it has taken up residence in your own thinking. I have told you about the law of hypnotic rhythm, the law by which nature hardens whatever a man repeats. I have told you about the law of hypnotic rhythm, the law by which nature hardens whatever a man repeatedly thinks into the permanent furniture of his life. Let me make you an offer the old teachers never could. For the price of lunch, I'll walk you through 14 days of the exact auto-suggestion ritual, a daily money decree, the identity work, all of it to pull your first unexpected $100 into your life. And that 100 isn't the point. It's the proof these teachings actually work. If nothing shows up, you pay nothing. That's the 14-day money magnet protocol. Test this law on your own life. Go to the second link in the description. I have told you that 98 men out of every 100 are today being carried downward by this law, not because it is working against them, but because they handed it nothing but aimless drift to work with. I have told you about the crossing, about the one decision that separates the man who escapes from the man who does not. I have told you that it is not education, not capital, not favorable circumstance that separates the man who escapes from the man who does not. I have told you that it is not education, not capital, not favorable circumstance, but definites of purpose, a burning unconditional demand placed upon one's own mind and then backed by a plan and driven by persistence that recognizes no defeat as final. I have told you about the savings habit, the humble, daily, unglamorous act by which every honest fortune in the history of this nation has had its beginning. The act by which a man casts his daily vote for freedom rather than for permanent servitude. And I have told you about the law of service, the QQS formula by which a man builds stone by stone, a reputation for excellence and generosity of effort that eventually draws wealth toward him with the same natural certainty that a magnet draws iron. These are not suggestions. They are laws. They operated before I discovered them. They will operate long after I am gone. Same natural certainty that a magnet draws iron. These are not suggestions. They are laws. They operated before I discovered them. They will operate long after I am gone. They do not care whether you believe in them. They do not care whether you find them convenient. They operate with the same indifferent precision as the law of gravity, rewarding the man who works with them and punishing the man who works against them. There are now 5 things I require of you before this address concludes. First, name the symptom. Look at the list of the 6 symptoms of the fear of poverty with the honesty of a man who is on trial before himself. Name the specific form in which this fear has operated in your life. Write it down. Second form, the decision, not a wish, not an intention. A decision final, unconditional, written clearly on paper stating the exact amount of money you intend to possess, the exact value you intend to give in return, and the exact date by which you intend. Final, unconditional, written clearly on paper stating the exact amount of money you intend to possess, the exact value you intend to give in return, and the exact date by which you intend to begin the possession. Write it, read it aloud tonight and every morning and every night until the thing it describes has become a fact. Third, begin saving today, not next month. Saving today, not next month, not when the situation improves. Today. Whatever portion of this day's wage or this week's income you can honestly set aside without breaking your obligations. Set it aside. The amount matters less than the act. The act is the declaration. Make the declaration. Fourth, go the extra mile tomorrow morning. When you arrive at your work tomorrow, render more than is required of you. Render it in the spirit of a man who understands that the law of compensation is always in operation, that more is always moving toward the man who gives more, just as surely and just as inevitably as the harvest moves toward the man who has planted. Fifth, burn the ships. If you have kept one foot in survival mode while experimentally placing the other foot in the direction of to wealth, it is time to move both feet. The man who keeps his options open keeps his poverty open along with them. The men who have escaped the condition you are in did not escape it by preserving a comfortable with them. The men who have escaped the condition you are in did not escape it by preserving a comfortable route back. They escaped it by making escape the only available direction. There can be no compromise between poverty and riches. The 2 roads travel in opposite directions. You cannot travel both at once. You cannot face toward wealth while your dominant thought faces toward poverty. The mind is not built to accommodate such division of loyalty. Choose your road, and then with the full weight of every principle I have laid before you this day, burn the ships. The stream is running. The current is constant. The choice of which side to enter is yours, and it is yours running. The current is constant. The choice of which side to enter is yours, and it is yours alone, and it is available to you at this very moment. Choose now, and do not look back. Before this video ends, make a decision. Keep wishing for money or start attracting it on purpose. Getting rich was never an accident. It's a mind trained to expect wealth. I've made the first step free for you, 1 page that reprograms your money mind. Go to thesecondlife.com, download your free Get Rich auto suggestion sheet, and begin tonight. Don't let this be one more sheet and begin tonight. Don't let this be one more video you watched and forgot. Links in the description.